So I want to thank you all for coming out to the RC-UNH event today, which is co-sponsored by the NAACP Club and the Black Student Union. Let's give it up for them. And the food. All right. And so today we have a very, very, very special guest poet. I hesitate to use poet because she does so many more things. Critical work is greatly appreciated and revered. The study she does with poetics, just her overall contribution to the field of poetry, in particular creative writing, African American literature, is very impressive. And so we're very lucky today to have Evie Shockley, person that I've known for a while and definitely admire for what she does creatively and critically in her poetics. Evie Shockley is the author of 2 books of poetry. The New Black, which came out with Wesleyan in 2011, which won the 2012 Hurston Wright Legacy Award in Poetry. And A Half-Read Sea, Carolina Wren Press, 2006, as well as a critical study, Renegade Poetics, Black Aesthetics and Formal Innovation in African American Poetry. Her poetry and essays appear widely in journals and anthologies, recently are forthcoming in Boston Review, Boundary 2, The Feminist Wire, Fence Jacket 2, Obsidian, Waxwing, the Volta Books of Poets, and the Cambridge Companion to Modern American Poetry. There you go. Her honors include the 2012 Holmes National Poetry Prize and residencies at Hedgebrook, MacDowell, and the Millay Colony for the Arts. Currently serving as creative editor of the Feminist Studies editorial collective, Shockley is Associate Professor of English at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. UNH, please put your hands together and let's give a warm welcome to Evie Shockley. Here you go. Oh, you might want to sort of put this on.
Is that good enough? Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. I am as a poet who is always accused of talking too quiet, I am out of voice. So if you really, really, really can't hear me at any point, just go, I really, really, really can't hear you. Thank you. Randall, thank you. I have come to understand, for example, when on my own campus, Mark Doty was referred to as that guy who introduced the poet, that poets are not prophets in their own land. So I just want to take this opportunity to let you all know how lucky you are to be working with Randall. He has an amazing, a wealth of experience or experiences that he can bring to his work and does and will bring to your class. You don't know that yet, some of you, but you're very, very fortunate. I'm going to start with a poem that's not my own because I like to share some of the love with people whose work matter to me. One of my own poetry teachers was Lucille Clifton, and her work has a kind of under-acknowledged influence on my own, and this is one of the ways that I like to acknowledge it. If you don't know her, get on Google and YouTube and get you some Lucille Clifton. This is her poem. The title is the first line. Study the masters, like my Aunt Timmy. It was her iron, or one like hers, that smoothed the sheets the master poet slept on. Home or hotel, what matters is he lay himself down on her handiwork and dreamed. She dreamed too, words, some Cherokee, some Maasai, and some huge and particular as hope. If you had heard her chanting as she ironed, you would understand form and line and discipline and order and America. So that is Lucille Clifton. This next poem, this first poem of mine, is a poem that I think of as a kind of way of introducing myself. So you're going to hear references to a lot of things that are important in my life, and culture, and in my house, and you'll also have a little sense of what to expect out of my poetry. It's called Mirror and Canvas. You've all seen artists do their own self-portraits, right? Yes, okay, so this is my mirror and canvas. Self-portrait with cats, with purple, with stacks of half-read books adorning my desk, with coffee, with mug, with yesterday's mug. Self-portrait with guilt, with fear, with thick-banded silver ring, painted toes, and no makeup on my face. Self-portrait with twins, with giggles, with sister at last, with epistrophe, with crepuscule, with Nelly, with my favorite things. Self-portrait with hard head, with soft light, with raised eyebrow. Self-portrait voodoo, self-portrait hijinks, self-portrait surprise. Self-portrait with patience, with political protest, with poetry, with papers to grade. Self-portrait as thaumaturgic glass, self-portrait as Luna larva, self-portrait as your mama. Self-portrait with self at 16, self-portrait with shit kickers, with hip huggers, with crimson silk, with wild mushroom risotto and a glass of Malbec. Self-portrait with partial disclosure, self-portrait with half-truths, self-portrait with demi-monde. Self-portrait with a night at the beach, with a view overlooking the lake, with canceled flight. Self-portrait with a real future, with a slight chance of sours, with glasses, with cream, with fries, with a way with words, with a propositional phrase. So since some of you have read or are reading from my book, The New Black, I want to spend some time with the poems in that collection, and I may end up with some new work. This book, The New Black, it came together, I realized, towards the end of writing the poems that ended up in this collection, as a kind of meditation on race. I was writing it in just the very beginning years of the middle of the aughts, the zeros, right? The first decade of the new millennium. And I was becoming more and more aware that I saw things differently than my students did. They would say things that shocked me, regardless of race. Like they just saw the world differently than I did. But then I remembered that I also said things that shocked my mother, and I was shocked by some of the things that she said. And around the same time, my twin nieces were born, and I realized that I had no idea what kind of world they were going to see when they grew up, like what kind of world it would be and how it would look to them. And so this book does a lot with history, because my sense of it finally was that how we see race, like many other subjects, has to do with when we come into the stream of history, what we experience ourselves versus what we have to hear about or read about. So with all that said, I'm going to read a few key poems from the book that pick up that theme, since this is Black History Month. The poem that opens the book was written, you'll figure out very quickly, I hope, who the figure is that is at the center of it. But I was thinking about the turn of the 21st century and the turn of the 20th century at the same time, what those periods had in common. My last modernist poem, number 4, or Rebirth of a Nation. A clean-cut man brings a brown blackness to a dream-carved, unprecedented place. Some see in this the end of race, like the end of a race that begins with a gun, a finished line we might finally limp across. For others, this miracle marks an end like years end, the kind that whips around again and again, an end that is chilling with a lethal spring coiled in the snow. Ask Lazarus about miracles. The hard part comes afterwards. He stepped into the reconstruction of his life, knowing what would come, but not how. How many of you know who Frederick Douglass is? Okay.
I meant to tell you that some of them might not know who the birth of the nation, but we'll get to that.
Oh, it's all, yeah, we can talk, Q&A. I will talk a lot and set up these poems, and I'll always forget something that might need to be said. And you all talk about that in class.
Well, yeah, we actually talked about it. Make it a modern time. Well, not my modernist class, but teach modern. Anyway.
So this poem is about Frederick Douglass. And I wanted to write about him. I was given at one point a prompt by Yusuf Komagraka when I was taking a workshop with him to write a poem in the voice of another person, a persona poem. And I wanted to write through Frederick Douglass. And so I went to the library and did a little research. I just wanted to remind myself of some of the basic facts. Well, it just so happened that the day that I was doing this research, just that week, new information about his life had come to light. And so I was confronted with evidence of his having had, I think, either definitely or very, very probably an affair with a German woman who came and spent time with him to translate his work. And her name is Ottilie Assing, and you'll hear that. And I started writing with the sort of challenge of trying to think about what it means to have heroes and expect them to be heroes 24/7, 365, birth to death. And this is the poem that I ended up writing. It's addressed to his oldest daughter, Rosetta. From the Lost Letters of Frederick Douglass, June 5th, 1892. Dear daughter, can you be 53 this month? I still look for you to peek around my door as if you discovered a toy you thought gone for good, ready at my smile to run up and press your fist into my broken palm. But your own girls have outgrown such games, and I cannot pilfer back time I spent pursuing freedom. Fair to you? To your brothers? Your mother? Hardly. But what other choice did I have? What sham, what shabby love could I offer you so long as Thomas Auld held the law over my head? And when the personal threat was ended, whose eyes could mine enter without shame if turning toward my wife and children meant turning my back? Your mother's eyes stare out at me through yours of late. You think I didn't love her, that my quick remarriage makes a Gertrude of me, a corseted Hamlet of you. You're as wrong as you are lucky. Had Anna Murray had your education as a girl, my love for her would have been as passionate as it was grateful. But she died illiterate when I had risked my life to master language. The pleasures of book and pen Retain the thrill of danger even now, and you may understand why Ottilie Ossing, come into our house to translate me into German, could command so many hours, years of my time, or as you would likely say, of your mother's time. Forgive me, Rosetta, for broaching such indelicate subjects, but as my eldest child and only living daughter, I want you to feel certain that Helen became the new Mrs. Douglass because of what we shared in sheaves of my papers. Let no one persuade you I coveted her skin. I am not proud of how I husbanded your mothers all those years, but marriage, too, is a peculiar institution. I could not have stayed so unequally yoked so long without a sense of freedom in it. Anna accepted this, and I don't have to tell you that her lot was better and she happier than if she'd squatted with some other man in a mutual ignorance. Perhaps I will post rather than burn this letter this time. I've written it so often, right down to these closing lines, in which I beg you to be kinder, much kinder, to your stepmother. You two are of an age to be sisters, and of like temperament. Under other circumstances, you might have found friendship in each other. With regards to your husband, I am, as ever, your loving father, Frederick Douglass. I'm not sure about the odds of daughters becoming friends with their stepmothers who are the same age as them. But, you know, hold out that hope. You know, just saying. So I like to balance things out. I want to read a poem that's about two of my favorite performers from back in the day. How many of you, I just need to know this, how many of you know who Ella Fitzgerald is? Excellent. How many of you have heard of, what was her name? Marilyn Monroe. Okay. What I didn't know until a few years ago, at the time when I wrote this poem, was that they were, that they not only met, but were friends and admirers of each other as well. And when I learned the story of how that came to be, Marilyn Monroe was such a huge fan of Ella Fitzgerald that in the 1950s, when Ella Fitzgerald had not yet been able to break the color barrier in terms of being able to perform in all white venues, Marilyn Monroe heard that she was trying to get a week at the most hip, most hot club in LA at that time, which was called the Macombo, and that they had turned her down. She called them up and she said, if you book Ella Fitzgerald for a week, I will take a front row table every night and the press will eat it up and everyone will be fine. And that's exactly what they did, and she knew her stuff. She knew what the publicity would mean and how it would work, and everyone was fine. And after that, the door was open for Ella Fitzgerald. A little longer for everybody, but you start where you can. So this is a poem about, not about that story per se, but taking that story as its inspiration about the moment when I began to think about what these two women have in common that I also had not known or thought about. It's called Celestial, LA, the mid-1950s. Her name was Ella, L, French for all woman, every woman, she, the third person, feminine, hippie, buxom, regal curls piled atop her head, soft shiny crown for her diamond voice, the soaring, swooping bird, the orchestra in her throat, the stars in her eyes, the star in front of her eyes, each night, 1 week at the Macombo. Her name was Norma. She wasn't normal, blonde. Her name was Marilyn, the eye and angelic, first person, created, an immaculate concept, the image of pure beauty, sound, power. Her name was Ella, L in French, all women in her eyes, the star in front of her eyes each night, glamorous, first lady of song, iconic, backstage, the effort behind the effortlessness, the exercise, the training, the makeup that made up the woman. Her name was Norma, Marilyn, Ella, Estelle, the star. If you start, you have to keep that up. So, hold back. Just kidding. I want to read a short poem that was inspired by Langston Hughes, a poet that I admire a great deal. He wrote this very short poem in the 1920s. Oh my God, I'm going to have to compete with that, aren't I? I'm just hearing the heater. Yeah, so if you can you hear me over it? Okay, yeah. It's fine. Hughes wrote this very short poem in the 1920s, and when I read it, I thought of it as a kind of challenge in a good way. And so I'll read his poem first, and then my poem that responds to the question he asks. Johannesburg Mines. In the Johannesburg mines, there are 240,000 natives working. What kind of poem would you make out of that? 240,000 natives working in the Johannesburg mines. So my poem is called Statistical Haiku, or How Do They Discount Us? Let me count the ways. Only 3 of 100 black boys entering kindergarten will graduate college. In the night sky, shooting stars. Every day, a black person under 20 years old commits suicide, plucked magnolia blossoms, funereal perfume. A black man is 700% more likely than a white man to be sentenced to prison. Scattered thunder showers in May. Every 3 minutes, a black child is born into poverty. Pine needles line the forest floor. So, thank you. I want to read a couple of poems that are about current events, but that. Oh, actually, no. I'm gonna read one more because this is a pleasure. I want to read a poem that was first published in an anthology that Randall co-edited several years ago. So this poem references, to understand it, you have to know about the Tuskegee Experiment. Does that ring a bell for anybody? It was quietly kept at the time that it was happening, and you have to keep reminding people about this history because there are lots of people who would just as soon see it erased again. During the 1940s, I want to say, 30, yeah, early to mid-century, at Tuskegee, Alabama, where Tuskegee Institute, the college that Booker T. Washington founded, is located. The government decided to run an experiment. They were interested in studying the venereal disease syphilis, right, STD. And so they recruited black men in the area who had been diagnosed with syphilis to participate in this study for a potential cure. Except that the experiment actually was to not give them any medication, that they would give them placebos basically, and to see how syphilis would run its course. The men did not know the real experiment that they were participating in, and they all suffered the various complications that syphilis brings on over the years and years that the study carried on. There's a famous movie about this called Miss Evers' Boys, which focuses on the nurse who knew, but for various reasons, felt she had no choice but to continue to participate and give them the placebo drugs. Her real name was Eunice Rivers, but they call her Evers in the movie, and that's how I refer to her in this poem. I have to say, the poem also references a current event in New York area, and this is a newspaper report that that started me to thinking about this poem. It was the drugs that were making the children ill, and the children had been enrolled on the secret trials without their relatives or guardians' knowledge. To be free in New York City, you need money. And this was called New York's HIV Experiment, and it was about giving trial drugs to Black and Latino orphans. A question of survival. Are we defined by what we can survive or what we can't? Some of us can test toxins on colored orphans, can ask them to swallow what their bodies will reflexively push up or down and out until their muscles clench around the memory of water and their limbs thin and tremble like twigs in winter. Some of us can't. Some of us can learn to gulp down drugs before we're old enough to spell FDA, while still too small and silent to be considered consenting. Can drink exotic cocktails and live to teach the doctors a thing or two about dosage. And some of us can't. What would Darwin say? Ask Miss Evers. Ask her boys. This is why so many of us write. We want, whether it's memories that you live through or memories that you're holding for the culture, you want to grab them and keep them. This next poem, let's see, can I do this? I want to read a poem that requires a lot of voice. So bear with me. I'm gonna crack and crunch. So, I might end up asking you all to sing for me. This poem is called Duck, Duck, Redux. And it is a poem that was inspired by the birth of my nieces. And hearing my mother sing a song to them that she used to sing to my sister and me when we were young. It was a moment when I started thinking, like I said, about the book as a whole, about the way the past and the present are always in conversation. So there are two epigraphs. Those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. That's George Santayana. And the second one is, those who cannot forget the past are destined to remix it. That's me. Duck, duck, redux. This is the way we wash our face, wash our face, wash our face. This is the way we wash our face so early in the morning. This is the way we segregate our schools in 1896. This is the way we segregate our schools in 2007. Mary had a little lamb, a bad, bad black sheep with 3 bags full of wool. It followed her to school one day, work one day, Wimbledon one day. It followed her to church one day, which was against the rule. This is the way we patrol the roads in the antebellum South. This is the way we patrol the streets in our shiny New York. Cue wedding bell. Oh, bring back my Shawnee to me. This is the way we appropriate Black culture in the post-Reconstruction period. This is the way we appropriate Black culture in the 21st century. This little piggy went to market, got mad bling for spitting whack rhymes and calling women hoes, and still wound up crying We, all the way home. This is the way we use a noose in Jim Crow America. This is the way we use a noose in Geno, Louisiana. Little blues boy, come blow your horn. I'm sorry to tell you, but his horn's done gone. And as for the boy who used to blow so sweet, he's under a mountain of debt, working for minimum wage. This is the way we wash our hands of you historically, throw you into the Atlantic, spray you with Birmingham hoses. This is the way we wash our hands of you today, with jerry-rigged levees, so early, so early in the millennium. How are y'all doing? You're okay? I usually have more energy that I have the energy, but I can't give it to you the same way I would like to. So you all have to make up the extra energy. I apologize for that. This next poem is called Improperty Behavior. It's in a form called the ghazal, which all you need to know about that. Yeah, okay. The ghazal is a great form.
We haven't had time to discuss it yet, but we can talk a little bit.
We can talk about it? Okay. So the ghazal is a form that comes from Persia, Persian culture, ancient Persian culture. It has come down to us and in its Americanized form because the languages require some accommodation. It's in couplets, and the first couplet sets up a refrain. The last 1, 2, 3 words of the line will repeat. And then after that, every couplet, the second line, repeats that refrain and also rhymes at the beginning of the refrain. So you'll be able, over the time, to start to anticipate what the end of each couplet is. The other thing you might want to know about the couplet, about the final couplet, is that it requires, technically you're supposed to include your name, address yourself in the last line. And I kind of cheat on that, and I'll explain how I cheated afterwards. Improperty behavior. Racial profiling. The idea that there's no legitimate reason for driving while black. Take Sean Bell. He got 50 bullets pumped into his car for driving while black. Home ownership is also improper behavior in Cambridge and beyond. Ask Henry Louis Gates, arrested in his own home for thriving while black. It seemed like the Obama's celebratory fist bump might derail his campaign, the first one. Now they know they should avoid things like high-fiving while black. Inner city hoops are, of course, appropriate, unlike swimming in the suburbs. The Creative Steps day camp kids were booted from a pool for diving while black. Even b-ball can fall out of bounds if the finals pitch you against a whiter team. The Rutgers women's players were slammed on the air for striving while black. Post-Katrina, New Orleans is open to anyone with the money to rebuild, except the 9th Ward, which they're discouraged from reviving while black. Like so many young men, Trayvon Martin was given a real mission impossible: to buy candy at the corner store without getting caught surviving while black. It's all about belonging. Even now, who belongs where is often based on who belonged to whom. Sometimes I wonder how I get away with living while black. So, as you may have noticed, I added a verse. Trayvon Martin's shooting, murder was years after, well, a year after this book was published, and I felt like his verse belonged in the poem, so I just added it.
Put in the correct.
I will. I sure will. So I don't want to try your patience too much. I've got maybe 3 or 4 more poems, or is that too much? 3? Great. Great. Okay. This next poem is just a poem about, in the sense it's a poem about writing poetry for me right now. When I finished The New Black, I felt, as some poets do when they get through a book, a little at sea. Didn't know exactly where I wanted to go next. And I also started to feel like, how do I, make it new again, which is one of the things that poet Ezra Pound suggested, and it's become a watchword for poetics in the century since. So the pressure to always make it new, when sometimes you've got tools that work and subjects that preoccupy you that you want to return to. So I wrote this poem, which begins with that meditation and kind of just moves from there. It's called That's a Rap Sheet Music for Alphabet Street. And if you know Prince, you'll hear him come back in at the end. If I sang the blues, would that be new or new? Would booze follow blues? Would blood follow bud, flower flows, sang-froid, cold-blooded, hot-blooded male? If I sang frigid, would that be cool? Jazzy, jizz, buzz, the word. Do I have the right to write the right body to remain silent? Habeas corpus, to have the remains dans mes mains, my main man, handyman, unhand me, uncuff me so I can speak in my sign-ifying language. Signs, wonders, miracles, temptations, 3 or 4 tops. Hip-hops, microbrews, microaggressions, address them and drop the mic. Ain't nothing new sign about us being under the gun. Checked in the black box, never a dull minute. Oh, pin it, mighty muse, flighty music. Put the light letters together. Take it away. All right. This is one. One of the things that is frustrating for me about the past 6, 7 years is that those of us who had a really strong critique of war and U.S. foreign policy up until Obama got into office, some of us stopped making those critiques once he was the one in office. And I celebrate his election, and I also hold him to task for what he does with the office that he's been entrusted with. So this poem is called I Declare War. Have any of you ever played that card game? Okay. Yeah, that or bid, whatever. Okay. I declare war. High stakes cards, 3 hidden, the 4th turned up. 9 beats 5, queen beats 10. Winner takes all resource-rich land. Cards lying face down may hide collateral damage. Kings are wild, but presidents are wilder. It used to take 2 branches of government to commit this country to international conflict. Now it only takes 1 joker willing to pull rank. Queen of diamonds takes wells of oil. Jack of diamonds takes Port-au-Prince. 4s met with 4. We're done talking. I declare war. In seconds, we're involved in a game where we risk everything. Our ace in chief seeks popular, not congressional support. He holds his cards close to the chest. He drones on and on about how smart his bombs are, how thick his deck. He's a real player. You don't say. I do declare. So I've got to choose a poem to end on. Do you all want this kind of ending or want this kind of ending?
Read both, but you want to read both of them?
Okay.
You want to read both of them?
I'll see. Actually, I just realized I may have been referring to a poem I left over there. Yeah. Oh, well, I could. No. I'm just going to read this last one, and if you need more, let me know. I've got one in my head. It's called Supply and Demand. The more black boys you have, the more you want. You act like we're swimming in black boys. You keep black boys in your pocket. If you had 1 million black boys, what would you do with them? Do you think we're made of black boys? Your black boys are all tied up in property. Black boys won't solve all your problems. You don't just find black boys lying in the street. It takes black boys to make black boys. Most people don't know how to save black boys. Black boys don't grow on trees. Thank you.
Give another round of applause. And so, before we end, I would like to, does anybody have any questions and answers, anything that you heard in the reading that you may want to ask Evie about her work, what she does, any of those things? Yes, sir, back in the back.
I actually just wanted to ask about the Frederick Douglass poem.
I'm gonna color.
Was it a relationship with his daughter deteriorate, like, or his children in general? Was it like tarnished or deteriorated?
You know, it's the relationship between him and his daughter is the speculation of the poem. The facts are, though, their mother was someone, Anna Murray, helped him escape financially, married him immediately after, and he stayed with her until she died. But it was a fairly open secret that he was having affairs, at least with a couple of women are connected with him, and that very, very soon after her death, and this is where the reference to Hamlet comes in, right? Very, very soon after her death, he remarried the woman who had been his, again, in the day the term would have been secretary, his personal assistant. And she was white, and so that was, Anna Murray had also been enslaved, and so it was complicated. Right.
You have a question? Y'all good? Y'all good? Are we reading that? Okay, I do want you to talk a little bit about the program, the Rutgers program in the summer, because we may have students that's interested. It's a good time to plug that.
That would be great. So for any of you who perhaps most narrowly are English majors, but maybe are in other majors and interested, even just in a sense of being curious about what it would mean to pursue a PhD in English and live the life of an academic in this discipline, working with literature. READY stands for Rutgers English Diversity Institute, and it's a program that Dr. Cheryl Wall and I co-direct at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. The program is designed to give people who might be interested but not committed, not certain of their interest in a PhD program, a chance. People who come from underrepresented backgrounds, thinking a lot of race and ethnicity, but not exclusively. People come, and we usually have about 12 to 15 students. It's a week-long program where you spend time in seminars, getting a taste of what it would be like to be in a graduate seminar in contemporary poetry or 19th century drama, various different subjects. We have a big outing on Thursday. There's a morning seminar in drama, and that evening we go into New York City and see the play that you've read that morning. Have dinner in the city, and that's always a fun time. There's a $500 stipend, and travel is paid. So it's a no-lose situation if you have any curiosity about pursuing graduate school in literary studies. So I encourage any of you who have that interest to see Dr. Horton, because he knows all about it. He has sent a New Haven student. Yep. Yep. And we loved her. We would love to welcome one of you. If it's not you, tell your friends. Thank you.
All right, let's give Rita a drum.